And now we are trying to get security guarantees agreement with the United States, guarantees for Russian people. NATO infrastructure is going closer and closer to our borders, and Ukraine is a direct threat to our security.
Your sanctions are nothing. Nobody feels it here. Those weren't the words of some random Russian citizen. They were delivered by Evani Popov, a prominent MP from Putin's party, directly to Keir Starmer's face on live television. As Britain continues pouring billions into Ukraine, and Starmer insists his foreign policy is working, this Russian official just exposed what many have suspected all along.
And as the host of his country's 60 Minutes political news programme, is one of Russia's most famous political faces. I asked him whether his country really does want peace.
It's unacceptable. British troops will be direct target for our missiles. You will get coffins in return.
The bold-faced humiliation didn't stop there. Wait until you hear what Popov said about British troops becoming missile targets if Starmer continues his current path. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favour. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now, back to the video. Just when Keir Starmer thought his foreign policy was beyond reproach, a Russian MP stepped into the spotlight to shatter that illusion completely.
We don't want to be at war forever. We didn't want this war. You should understand our main goal is security.
What began as a seemingly routine interview about the Ukraine conflict quickly transformed into a startling reality check for Starmer's government. One that exposed the gaping holes in Britain's entire approach to Russia. For months now, Starmer has been parading around Westminster, claiming his sanctions against Russia were bringing Putin's regime to its knees. The British media has eagerly amplified this narrative, painting a picture of a Russian economy in freefall, with ordinary citizens suffering under the weight of Western punishment. It's a comforting story for Starmer to tell, justifying the billions in aid sent to Ukraine while British families struggle with the cost of living crisis. Then along came Evani Popov, and the carefully constructed facade came crashing down in spectacular fashion. What's remarkable about this interview isn't just what Popov said.
And now we are trying to get security guarantees agreement with the United States, guarantees for Russian people. NATO infrastructure is going closer and closer to our borders, and Ukraine is a direct threat to our security.
But the utter confidence with which he said it. While being questioned by a British journalist clearly expecting the usual defensive responses, Popov instead went on the offensive, looking directly into the camera, essentially staring down Starmer and his cabinet. He declared without hesitation, "Your sanctions is nothing. Nobody feel it here." The journalist visibly recoiled. This wasn't in the script. The Russian was supposed to look uncomfortable, perhaps offer excuses about temporary economic difficulties. Instead, Popov systematically dismantled the entire British narrative about Russia's supposed economic collapse. The disconnect between Starmer's claims and Popov's reality couldn't be more stark. While Starmer tells Parliament that Russia is economically crippled, Popov casually mentioned, "Of course we have some problems in our economy, but it's not so big as you want, and we will fix it." It was the political equivalent of watching someone casually brush lint off their shoulder while being told they're on fire. This raises serious questions. Has Starmer been knowingly misleading the British public? Or is he himself so disconnected from reality that he genuinely believes his sanctions are having the devastating impact he claims? Neither option inspires much confidence in his leadership, but the economic issues were just the starting point of Starmer's humiliation. The interview took an even more damaging turn when Popov addressed the fundamental justification for the conflict itself. While Starmer's government has consistently portrayed Russia as the clear aggressor, Popov offered a perspective that directly challenges this simplistic framing. NATO infrastructure is going closer and closer to our borders, and Ukraine is a direct threat to our security. Popov stated firmly. This wasn't presented as an excuse, but as a straightforward geopolitical assessment. The implication was clear. From Russia's perspective, they are responding to what they perceive as an existential threat, not engaging in unprovoked aggression. What makes this particularly embarrassing for Starmer is how it exposes the naive oversimplification that has characterised his entire approach to the conflict. The Prime Minister has consistently framed the situation in black and white terms, brave Ukraine versus evil Russia, without acknowledging the complex geopolitical realities that have led to this point. Popov's comments highlight how Starmer has failed to understand, or at least failed to acknowledge, the Russian perspective on NATO expansion. This isn't about justifying Russia's actions in Ukraine. It's about recognising that effective foreign policy requires understanding your adversary's motivations and concerns, not simply dismissing them as propaganda. Starmer's refusal to engage with this reality suggests either a dangerous naivety or a cynical political calculation to maintain a simplistic narrative that resonates with voters. The most remarkable aspect of the interview was how Popov seemed completely unfazed by British pressure. There was no defensiveness, no apologetic tone. Instead, he projected absolute confidence in Russia's position and capabilities. This stands in stark contrast to Starmer's increasingly desperate attempts to convince the public that his Ukraine strategy is working. For a Prime Minister who has staked so much of his international credibility on his handling of the Ukraine conflict, this interview represents more than just an embarrassing moment. It raises fundamental questions about whether Starmer has the diplomatic sophistication to navigate one of the most complex geopolitical crises in recent history. But perhaps the most alarming revelation from this interview was Popov's chilling warning about Starmer's apparent willingness to deploy British forces to Ukraine as peacekeepers after any potential deal. British troops will be direct target for our missiles. You will get captains in return. That's it, he declared with unmistakable clarity. No diplomatic niceties, no room for misinterpretation. Just a cold, calculated threat laid bare for all to witness. This isn't simply political posturing, it's a glimpse into the deadly serious consequences Starmer might be courting. While the PM paints himself as a statesman on the world stage, this exchange reveals the profound disconnect between Downing Street's perception of the conflict and the harsh realities on the ground. The recent escalation in tensions between the UK and Russia has created a geopolitical powder keg that Starmer seems dangerously unprepared to navigate. Rather than the moral crusade portrayed in British media, this rare window into Russian thinking suggests Starmer is sleepwalking toward a confrontation with potentially catastrophic consequences. All while the British public remains largely unaware of just how precarious the situation has become.